Can I thank the Planning Council for asking me to speak to you? And I see that the Planning Council was astute enough to ask you here not to discuss the implications of the treaty, but the implications of the debate about the treaty. Obviously, the government is playing a major part in that debate. You, as decision makers, are entitled to know the aims and intentions the government brings to the discussion on the treaty issues. If that adds to your understanding of what is happening, it may also add to your ability to anticipate what is likely to happen. The point I would like to make to you is this. The government has no illusions about the difficulty of our race relations issue. We are equally convinced that that issue is not insoluble. Those issues can be resolved, not this year or next, and not by shouting at each other, but by consultation between people of goodwill who want to resolve them. And may I say to you, in response to the Mayor's self-compliment, that there is no better place than Auckland to discuss treaty issues. When we talk of urban drift, we are always aware that this is where it stops. The extraordinary mix which makes up our city has produced our most brilliant successes and our most serious problems. It is our best, it is our worst, and if we can make sense of the treaty in this city, we can make sense of it anywhere. Now, I'd imagine that if you seized upon some inhabitants of Auckland as they passed by this hotel and asked them for their views on the relevance of the treaty, we would get a mixed response. The vox pops would be, I think, in some senses belligerent, non-comprehending, or perhaps ingratiating, because particularly if the interviewer was larger than they were. But it would be a pretty mixed bag of responses. As far as English-speaking New Zealand is concerned, the treaty lost its influence only a few years after it was signed. Dr. Orange will have given you an account of the treaty's shifting place in history. For many years it was ignored by governments, and in the courts was held to be a nullity. That view is undoubtedly still reflected in the attitudes of many English-speaking New Zealanders towards the treaty. The Maori response is not the same. Not for them, the background that I had in the law. I was told from the time that I started doing law that you couldn't have a treaty between anything other than two sovereign states. The Māori never considered that matter in 1840 at all. They had not had the benefit of either a legal or classical education they trusted. And they have always acknowledged the importance of the treaty, and they have always asserted its authority. Their case has always been made on the basis of the treaty. The fact of it is that Māori people wish their dealings with the government to be determined by the treaty. Now, those differing attitudes are not irreconcilable. We can all learn, we can all understand our differences and negotiate agreements. We all have to live together, and for all our disagreements, we have too much in common to drift away from each other. I ask you to imagine for a moment that there was no treaty. Well, the theft of land would still be an issue, even if there were no treaty. The denial of ancient rights, which is a concept strong in English law, the prescriptive right to access to land or resources, is a fundamental common law right. Without the treaty, that would persist. Inequality would certainly be an issue, even if there were no treaty. Now, most of us would rather work out those issues than fight about them. Most of us are inclined to be reasonable. Most of us understand that there has to be give and take in any relationship if we want to get along. We then have to ask what the treaty means in terms of the everyday activities of the government. Well, the answer isn't to be found in the courts. Complicated legal arguments about the literal meaning of the words of the treaty will never be able to settle the differences there are between us or solve any of the problems of race relations. I am not suggesting that people who believe that their rights have been denied should not have their day in court. I can understand the frustration which has driven many Maori people to pursue their claims in court. I am sure that many lawyers will take a lot of time, put a lot of energy and make a lot of money arguing the meaning of the references to the treaty which have appeared in recent statutes. I think there will always be some cases where independent judgment is needed, and the court may well be the best place to get it. I do say, however, that the courts are not the best place to settle the economic and social issues which lie at the heart of our race relations. The problem with using the court to determine treaty issues is that courts settle cases by finding winners and by finding losers. When you have a court case, you've just got to have a contest. Neither side can take the risk of losing by going in anything less than boots and all. The court is not a forum for reconciliation. Courts are not designed to be places to find the middle ground. The courts will never settle and will never come close to settling the complex issues of race relations which concern all of us. Everyone of us in this room can do more to help our race relations than a full bench of appeal court judges. We only need a willingness to understand the issues and to understand our neighbours. Economic and social issues must ultimately be resolved through the political process. I am talking about a process which fortunately is much broader than a general election, although that obviously has an influence. In this, we are talking about the complex relationship between people and government, the way in which government consults, the way in which its agencies act, and the way in which governments decide priorities. And I want to explain to you the approach the government brings to its dealings with Māori people. We would like to be fair. That's our goal. I'd like to tell you what that means in a practical sense in terms of public sector policy and programs. I should tell you that we start with three essential propositions. First, we want to deal in a practical way with the grievances between the Crown and Māori people which arise from the treaty. Second, we intend to make decisions only after taking into account the views of all interested parties. And third, we must ensure that this country's resources are managed in the interests of all New Zealanders. Now, I'm not going to suggest to you that we hit every target or live up to every standard we set ourselves, but those are the goals that we chase for. And I have to say to you that I take it for granted that the electorate does not expect the government to work miracles. I'm actually confident that most people understand that we're dealing with difficult issues which take time to work through. We are, for example, working through those issues in public administration. I have heard many Māori people defend and in fact require the continuing existence of the Māori Affairs Department, but not one of them would argue that it has no weaknesses. One of the strange things about it is that Māori people are its sternest critics. The government in turn accepts that the department has not always been an effective agency and accepts too that there have been failings in the way other departments have dealt with Māori people. Well, that's the analysis. We then have to work out how to do better. Our aim, as in all the social services, is genuine equality of opportunity, and to achieve that goal there must be a continuing process of consultation and negotiation between government and Māori people. They must feel that the government is capable of responding to them, just as the government has to be sure that the money it spends on behalf of all the community is getting the right result. If we do not have that kind of continuing interaction between government and Māori, the result can only be alienation, and that's good for none of us. We must have an active working relationship between government and Māori, and to abandon that relationship is to abandon ourselves to confrontation. That's why the reshaping of the Māori Affairs Department has been the subject of a lengthy period of consultation which still continues. That's why the reformed administration will reflect not the traditional structures of European bureaucracy, but the traditional structures of Māori society. The treaty itself explains why that's necessary. One signature at Waitangi on behalf of the Crown bound all the Queen's subjects, whether any of them knew about it or cared about it. On the Māori side, there are more than 500 signatures on behalf of iwi and hapu, every member of which probably had something to say about it and certainly had a personal stake in it. Now, we're different people and we have to accept the fact of our differences. And when we do, we shall stop being disappointed in each other and can start to live productively together. Now, I'm not suggesting that Māori society is the same today as it was 150 years ago. I am, however, in no doubt that it is different in fundamental ways from European society, and that fairness demands that the government deal with it differently. That is why the services the government offers to Māori people will look different from the service it offers to other people. That is not to say that they are better services which are offered to Māori or extra services. They are the services we are all entitled to, delivered differently. I emphasise that the government has programs for Māori because there is disadvantage among Māori. The evidence of that disadvantage is abundant. We have a responsibility to deal with disadvantage wherever we find it, and when we deal with Māori people, we have to get our policy right. Differences in policy call for understanding. I accept that the government has a job to do in increasing understanding of what is happening in the Māori Affairs Administration. And we have to do that in the Māori world, and we sure have to do that in the Pakeha world. And then we have to distance the good work of many Māori agencies from what happened when some services were hijacked by extremists. We also have to silence extremists on the other side who claim that any assistance to Māori people means that they're getting special treatment. What's happening is that the Department of Māori Affairs is to become what is called the Iwi Transition Agency. And the agency's 5-year lifespan will end in June 1994. Its task will be to strengthen the administrative capacity of iwi so that tribes can work with government agencies to determine the programs appropriate to their needs and to take the first steps towards self-reliance. All of that means that we have to have a new rigour of accountability. Such a rigour cannot be imposed without a new legal concept. Iwi will have to be given and assume a legal identity. And Iwi's authority bill will be introduced for that purpose early next year. Māori people have been disadvantaged in the past by the fact that our legal system gives no recognition to traditional tribal structures. The bill will provide such a remedy. May I also say that Pakeha people have been disadvantaged in the past because there is no legal definition of an iwi. And therefore people have been subjected to claims or the threat of claims which have not been embraced by any structure apart from the individual claimants, some of whom have been self-seeking publicists or extremists and who have themselves been an embarrassment to the iwi that they claim to be part of. So we have to come back, we have to provide that vehicle which will have two effects. It will have the effect of giving accountability so that you can invigilate the proper and effective delivery of services, and it will also rationalise who claims to be speaking for whom. In other words, at some stage of the process, someone will be able to get a handle on it. And he'll be able to say, look here, are we talking to you or are we not? Are you the claimant, are you not? Whom do you represent? What authority do you have to be here now? We'd like to be serious and discuss and debate with you. Now, I hope that that will do a great deal to resolve the present situation, which frequently appears to generate more heat than light in the government's relationship with Māori people. And indeed, it would be astonishing if we didn't have that heat and light at the moment. And in my view, it would be astonishing if the heat didn't start to go down and the light emerge once we get some proper structures for talking with each other. Because there is certainly a fantastic scope in the course of dealing with specific issues for misunderstandings and paranoia. And of course, when you get not just the interests of the claimants that are involved, but people who believe themselves to be the potential losers in any negotiation, then the whole thing develops into a real sort of Donnybrook of extremely interesting proportions. Now, what has happened with the fishing negotiations is an example of that. And you couple that with the background against which those negotiations took place. It is not the bonanza industry that it was portrayed to be. And the climate of economic uncertainty there was itself a breeding ground for suspicion and resentment. And so too when you get claims in respect of economic resources being trumpeted throughout a land where people are feeling the effect of recession and change. It's no wonder that race relations now becomes the first resort of the third-rate politician. I'm actually surprised that we're not worse off, because there has been a holding back from a wholesale wading in of that easy headline-grabbing fair race relations. I don't wish to gloss over the race problems, but I'm certain that we can identify their origins and that we can resolve them. I actually say that even about the fishing negotiations. These difficulties are engaging some of the finest minds and the highest salaries in the country at the moment. And the government accepts that Māori people have a grievance over fisheries. For many years, a reference in statute to their traditional fisheries was absolutely ignored. Traditional rights, which would have had standing had there been no treaty, have been denied. The difficulty is that there is no agreement about the nature and extent of the treaty right. That in the end is the reason why the issue is now back before the court. The bill, which is now before a select committee of Parliament, was a genuine attempt at a settlement, but it is apparent that without change it will not resolve the strong differences among the various interests. There may well be no final resolution until we have the view of the court about the nature and extent of Māori rights to fisheries. In the meantime, the Deputy Prime Minister, in his capacity as the chair of the Special Ministerial Committee on Māori Fisheries, proposed an interim arrangement which would give Māori people an allocation of 2.5% of fishing quota a year over the next 4 years. We're working through now the detail of that proposal. If a satisfactory arrangement can be come to, the government will make representations to the Select Committee to adopt it instead of the original measure. Well, I'm sure that we will see before the finish a great deal of television footage of courtroom drama and angry fishing folk. I think that extremists on both sides of the argument will try to elbow their way through for their unlovely purposes. There's no place for them. There is a place for people with different opinions. There's a place for people with different interests, but above all, there is a place and a need for people of goodwill. And we will get those people of goodwill because the government has no interest in a solution which picks winners and clobbers the losers. We are going to have practical acceptance of the reality. People can't all win, but there need be none of the humiliation which has characterised that type of resource negotiation or claiming in the past. We're all going to have to live here, and we're going to have to look for settlements which suit the overwhelming majority of us. I believe, by way of an example, that a satisfactory, indeed a good settlement was reached on the Ōrākei settlement. I mean, we had the recommendation and the government recognised that the Crown had done wrong by Ngāti Whātua. So traditional land was restored, public access remained, people felt good, honour. had been addressed, resources were available, the priceless asset remains. It was worked on, they had their day, not in court, but months in a forum, and there was a just outcome. None of that was easily reached. None of these settlements is easily reached. No reform can be easily achieved. We have to accept that. We have to accept that the process of consultation is long and exhausting, and anyone who has been involved in it will know that it is far longer and far more exhausting than anything which arose in the days of the old wage round or government intervention and union activities. Māori claims issues are matters of patience and persistence. They are not matters for recalcitrance and defiance. And if you can keep that dialogue going, you have the prospect of getting it through. The fact of it is that if we rush at it headlong, we will rupture the process and we will get it wrong. Some government policy needs radical change, or a quantum leap, or nothing would actually change. Well, I tell you that race relations isn't in that category. That is a very human dimension which cannot be treated as some other aspect of, say, economic policy deserved to be treated. Because there's no quick fix to it. We can't afford to take the chance with it, because the good or the ill will be entrenched for a long time to come. We've got to turn down the heat and not turn it up. And if that means Tiffany and claimants that we have to talk ourselves into a state of mutual exhaustion for a positive result, we're certainly better off working ourselves into that state than into a state of total belligerence. And that's something which I give you my pledge in terms of the government's attitude towards it. Sometimes all that's needed is a little thoughtfulness. May I say to those of you who are in business that in my experience, it's always advisable to take Māori interest into account at the start of your planning. Yeah. I can actually tell you from sad experience in government, we've sometimes overlooked those interests only to find that they've crept up behind us and hit us on the head. And it's better to get in and find out what it is, suss out the ground, see where the whole thing's lying, work out who really does speak for who in the scheme of things. Don't be taken off course by someone that purports to and that you later find out doesn't. Come to the heart of the matter. Go to the base of the sentiment. Go to the point of tradition. Talk to the old. Work out what the issues are. And then you'll find that they can be taken through the course. It makes more sense for government and business to consult with the local tribe or sub-tribe at the start of a venture than to have a bit of dispute later on, which could easily have been avoided. Consultation certainly does no harm and can well do a great deal of good. The point is, of course, that Māori interests and other interests can be reconciled. They can be worked through in the interest of the whole community. And the government, in its dealings with Māori interests, makes the assumption that the distribution and the management of resources must benefit the whole community. Any government has a responsibility to make sure that resources are not squandered, or that one generation does not plunder the heritage of another. As far as the fishing negotiations are concerned, we have to be very careful that proper and astute and conservative management of the fisheries resource is part of any settlement. One result of that settlement will be that conservation laws will apply equally to all of us. And we are going to see that that comes through. Some Māori people may see the government's caution in the management of resources as yet one more obstacle to their economic progress. It is not meant to be. Our aim is to work with Māori people to improve their ability to be competitive in business and add to the stake they have in the economy. We must do more than give Māori money and invite them to get out there and make some more. Many people here will know the difficulties of starting a small business. There are some people here who know about the difficulties of starting a large business. But small or large, there's difficulty. The success rate is not great. Many of you will know the extraordinary complexities of running a business of medium or large size. And the skills which are needed are not learnt overnight. Some take years to acquire. If Māori people are to build themselves a sound economic base, and I believe it is in the interest of all of us that they do, then the government must take an active role in developing business skills among Māori people. That's why there's a Mana Enterprises Development Program which aims to encourage small business enterprise establishment. The Māori Development Corporation and the Pōtama Trust have been established to promote Māori business ventures. The Māori Access Program offers courses in business skills. Those programs may work for the immediate benefit of Māori people, but in the end, they are working for all of us. And I finally say this: as long as Māori people are at the wrong end of every economic and social indicator, we shall store up trouble in our race relations. The current recession has shown us starkly what can happen. The point is that failure by Māori people is not inevitable. It does not have to happen. They can and they will succeed, and they will succeed on their merits, not at a cost to others. What the government has to do in dealing with Māori people is to understand our differences and allow for them. That is the essence of fairness. It is tolerance, which is essential for economic and social development. I've tried to describe to you today how the government is trying to put that into practice. It's not easy, given all the past experience, and it's frustrating because there are no quick fix solutions. We are, however, learning to do things differently. And if all of us Māori, Pakeha and government allow for our differences and act in response to the challenge of that diversity, we can in fact make real progress. There is one thing that I believe this government will be seen for, and that is that it has made an earnest response to the challenge of this issue. It probably has made an incautious response because it has gone in some cases ahead of public opinion, but it has done all of that because there is nothing more compelling than the resolution of this issue. This is an issue which will transcend debate about economic styles, it will transcend debate about local government restructuring. It's a matter which is going to transcend all those other issues, because unless this country learns how to handle itself and its peoples with justice, there is no point in economic, bureaucratic or any other theory. This is the whole guts of what we're about. We're going to keep at it.